Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. As a warning here, I'm pretty sure I'm playing till first win and then maybe explanation and then out. This will be one of my shorter broadcasts. Okay, that's it, guys. That's it. That's it. I did it. I played well. That's well. Both sides played that game well. That's it for playing. Let's review. That one was important to me, and I thought my opponent played well. So that's that. Hey, Jordan. All right, we had one big blunder. It was also the game driving mistake. This is sometimes called a game driving mistake. It was an, usually an interesting move that was wrong for some reason, and both sides missed it. Here, I missed it by playing it. My opponent missed it because there's this fork in response. Nope, not quite like that. There's a fork in response to my move, represented like that. Um, that would have been helpful for black. Okay, so uh, that's a blunder and then a miss. So then from here, I decided, let's go over the starting from the beginning. E4, D5. This is great play for online blitz. This is called the Scandinavian opening, and queen takes D5, and then knight to C3 almost always. And this one featured the version of this opening where the queen goes back to D8 instead of to A5. They're both, you know, they're different. They're quite different. So queen to D8, and then I'm playing for control of the center with D4. E6 is a great move to start getting some kingside development going for black, and maybe a castle in soon thereafter. Bishop B5 check. I was actually kind of pretty much shown off about this, shown maybe otherwise. Not in a crazy way, but then when I played bishop to D3, I'm showing again attention to the center and a repositioning that makes sense. C6 is not entirely strengthening. All right, this is mostly strengthening for black. It comes with the idea that that C6 blocks in the B8 knight, and sometimes the C8 bishop. B5. My opponent is trying an early pawn storm, and I said, yeah, I'm going to stop that with A3. This pawn storm is going nowhere after A3. It's a little bit maybe timid at this early stage in the game. Some more aggressive moves would be kingside castles, bishop to G5, bishop to F4, bishop to E3 for a super solid string of pawns and one bishop right in the heart of white's position. But I played A3 because I thought it just really directly stomped out most of black's most aggressive ideas on the queen side. With bishop takes B4, yeah, okay, so maybe black has some tension there, but it's not exactly a full-on pawn storm. I can castle in time, and double pawns don't bother me that much. So that was the idea behind pawn to A3. We're both good. Yeah, I think so. And knight to D5. I take this moment to make things a little more complicated with bishop to G5. And now my opponent has this battery aimed at my bishop on G5, but white can get away with knight takes D5 without too many problems. The recapture with the C pawn, I had looked at and thought, well, this pawn hangs, and so I thought instead black might play bishop takes G5, and then things are complicated again. Does the queen recapture and try to go for some sort of swap of queens, or does the knight recapture and have a little bit of territory right in black's camp where he's most likely gonna castle. So queen takes g5 and knight takes g5. I think are probably both going to be viable. This didn't happen because my opponent captured c6 takes d5, and then the pickup of the b5 pawn with check was sort of the point where I said, okay, now I have an advantage, slight advantage to advantage. Yeah, probably just I have the advantage here. We have some of these pieces developing in a timid way, but nothing catastrophic for white and nothing catastrophic for black yet. Bishop at g5 takes e7, and the queen recapturing. I said I'll trade bishops too. Partly in a position like this, I would want to also calculate more strongly or thoroughly queen takes queen to e2 or queen to d3. Both moves simply protecting the bishop is a subtle way to apply pressure. Queen e2, it doesn't look like it applies pressure to much. I mean, maybe the e file, but this is applying pressure. Queen e2 is applying pressure because of, yeah, recapture with check, and then there's like potentially there's a hole here. Maybe black blocks with his knight, and there's this queen to b7, and then threats against a8, and once a8 moves, then a7, whatever it is, but it's just in general a way to apply aggressive pressure. A move like queen to e2, and I would say also queen to d3. And instead, I just traded minor pieces. My opponent recaptures with the queen. Queen takes d7, and knight to e5 is strong. Right? He has to take 2 moves against this. My opponent each here they has to take 2 moves against my 1 move. One move, one has to be the queen escaping in some manner. Probably c7. Not entirely certain. It could be other places along this diagonal. So that's 1, and then my knight's there, and I'm making a castle or bringing my queen into play or something. And then 2, pawn to f6. So it's very base. Even if I retreat back to f3, I've shaken things up and probably have some slight amount of initiative to show for all that. But I don't even have to go back to f3. It might be stronger to move to d3 or g4 or whatever. So that was the idea behind knight to e5, where the knight is strongly outposted, except for, of course, that there is f7, f6. So even though there's that kick move available, it's still worth it in terms of initiative. Queen to e7. The computer the computer doesn't like that for some reason. We don't have to go into that. I'm not sure if it's all that bad. Maybe because c6 is weak in a weird way. It's covered, but it's covered by a piece on its starting square that's blocking in the a8 rook. So black has to probably solve the issue with c6 somehow. Maybe knight trade on d7, and I guess my knight can go to c6 anyway and be attacking black's queen. A mix of strategic and tactical considerations. Queen d3, like I said, he would go into these in depth with a long search, a long deep thought, a deep think. In this position, you would go into probably a deep think as white. Even on something like queen d3 or queen e2, the situation is maybe it's not extremely level because of the extra pawn I have, but the position is at that point where both sides. So what? What's to do? How do I make hay out of a pile of hay? You could consider other moves by white's queen. I liked g4. All these moves here could all be potential queen moves. Um, get that. And then there's always castles kingside available too. So there's a lot of good available moves. No one move will be a total knockout, but there's castles and then several moves for white's queen. And you know what? Queen to d2 is not so bad either. So uh, it's an interesting move. It's be an interesting position for advanced players to study and maybe study on your own and then confer. A group of 4 or 5 or 6 of you, what you think White's plan and move here should be. Right, Queen to d3. So when I chose to play Queen to d3, I felt that this was flexible enough, as well as getting the queen into action where she's not gonna get in any trouble anytime soon, right? This knight probably isn't gonna be troublesome, against White's queen, or at least not very soon. Pawn to f6, knight to f3, knight to c6, queen to b5 is sort of, if tit tat kind of pressure, constantly forcing black to make saving moves that are there. They're there, and they're not. And my moves aren't all that well calculated out. But you have to keep, threat after threat after threat after threat. White is posing threat after threat after threat after threat. The same there both times, but white is going to just pose threat after threat after threat. What that does, shake things up a bit, board wise. But it also keeps black on his or her or they toes. And it's a form of mental pressure. You constantly have to meet threats like that. Black will, make some kind of mistake. And sometimes that mistake is the whole game. So you're just constant threat after threat after threat. It's aggressive chess. I thought my opponent met this threat in pretty much the best way. This piece was not doing all that much work for he, she, or they. So rook to c8, keeps the piece covered. His queen is still free to exert her influence. Well, not there. Exert her influence on the chessboard. All right, so keeps the queen free. The other rook is still connected in all this. So I thought queen to the other rook is still connected in all this. The a7 pawn is still guarded should there become an attacker because the knight's still at c6. I like this move. Rook a8 to c8. It's a very subtle but strong move. Now, okay, I played rook to e1. Again, making good use of a piece that otherwise wasn't really that important. Guarding f2 is not the priority right now, so rook to e1 might be, and that's why I played it. f5 is a little bit of a... I see the idea. Rook to f6 and then maybe over to g6 or h6. That's not bad, but it does allow some, vague opportunities for white. These are not crystal clear, knight for a pawn kind of opportunities, but there will be opportunities now that e5 is left behind as a little bit of negative space, and that space is controlled by white. Though also black has a claim to lay on it. It's just white will put the knight there, just like in the game. Let's take a look. First, I decided to try to double on the e-file. I made some sort of horrible error here, right, where the knight can capture on d4, forking the queen and rook. This is back to where we were before. Let's take a moment, my friends, and we're gonna practice this against computer. See if white can find another move. A move we're avoiding knight to e5 and still play in a strong way that probably, if I'm looking at this correctly, will transpose into the position reached or intended anyway. This, okay, that's strong. This is not exactly. I say this a lot, yeah. I think. All right, so just outright objective improvement, right? With hardly any consequence against it. C3, so just clear and straightforward improvement. Nothing but improvement. And we can even trade these queens. And now when white has the extra pawn, he has the extra pawn without the queens on the board. Right, so c3 is a good nuanced move to just perform just outright improvement on the position. But going back, if you want to, I'd say that might be a great move, and I would play that personally in a tournament. But there's other options. Notice that pawns here are mostly protected. If we move rook to e2 takes e6, we leave c2 unprotected, but it might be worth it to get the attack going, where before it seemed like trading queens was the greatest thing. Perhaps getting the attack going is awesome as well. So rook takes e6, and I'm gonna go with torch here. Positions like this, a lot of major pieces in action on a mostly open chessboard, right? That it's gonna be exceedingly difficult to calculate well in this kind of in these positions. So let's take torch 4. Let's play the computer on maximum is also kind of like torch 4. The computer on maybe not. The computer on maximum is telling us that rook takes e6 wasn't the way to go, and that instead, like we had thought, like I would have played in a tournament, c3. Trade these queens and then be up a clear pawn in a 2 rook and medium number of pawns endgame. I'll play this out from here. My goal might be to play. I might play rook e7. You know, if he doubles up on the c file, or if my opponent, I'll call me. If he doubles up on the c file, then he's hitting into the back of his own pawn. And at that point I can even force a trade of rooks. And if he captures on e7, then rook takes e7. This pawn is under attack, so some sort of protect or movement from that pawn, followed by rook to c7, and there's no way to defend the c4 pawn. Let's do that. Rook to e7. Alright, so instead of worrying about his own pawn, so sometimes you have to take your time to be thorough. All that analysis, and I didn't forget about all that analysis, and the b2 pawn remains, it sits right where it is, unprotected. This could become worse than we need it to be. Thinking captures on a7 is good, and of course noting the potential back rank mate. Yeah, so let's go back. This is not white's best play. Rook e7 is considered good. So it's deceptively not as good as I had anticipated. So let's go here, and then the computer played rook c7. Just go with the trade, maybe. Let's trade on the back rank. White is doing okay, but not as well as I would have wanted. I think part of black's strength is in the rook at c7, protecting c4 and protecting a7. Also in line with his king, so also protecting from, at least from this side, black checks against black's king. As there's just, black is very, very well positioned here. This is positionally in terms of what's going on the chessboard. This rook is the most powerful piece on the board, and then some. Look at white by contrast. We play f4 and maybe make some kind of pawn arrow like that, and then get into action on f2. That takes a while. This is going to take a while for white's king to go to f2 and become a force here. Not only that takes a while. How about this? My rook's being attacked. We gotta get our rook the heck out of there. We want to threaten this loose piece for some reason, and then the king comes into town, and white has to move again. So this is not great for white. I'm saying, we have an extra point of material, so that's not to be. That's not nothing, right? As they say, that's not nothing. But I think we can do better. Looking at the points here, 1.1. Well, let's go back to the trade, the proposed trade. That's gonna still be there, I think, as long as so we get some of our ancillary attacks or ancillary ideas and moves underway first. This is close. This is close, and I'm playing the computer on maximum. So let's say that this is approximately an equal position. We see that the white is maybe a little bit better off because of his extra pawn. This is close. Okay, where were we? All the way back to here. But this is back to the stem game, if you can believe it. All that was from this, one of the moments on this game. We'll go back and review some of the STEM game. Not science, technology, engineering, and math, or at least that's not how I intend it, but the STEM game, being closer to the root, the game that spawned the other analysis in some ways. So here, here white smells blood, so to speak. The intention, I believe, for black was rook to c1. Then if rook takes c1 is a good sort of like natural response to that. Queen takes c1, and it's not checkmate quite because of queen to f1 blocking, but this is in favor. This line would be in favor of black. Let's play that out. I bet you queen takes c1. Yeah, and then this is a forced move. There's no other legal move, and now black is chomping one pawn already and another pawn most likely to follow here, and white's queen position is passive. The king has some lingering back row issues. This is not good for white, but this is definitely not good. So we'll go back, and instead of playing rook takes c1, as natural as it may be, I was able to find queen takes d5. The capture on e1 doesn't bring about a mate or the backpedaling of the queen. Instead at that point, rook takes e1, a trade of rooks, and it's pretty darn even. So, but now with queen takes d5, black has to take time out to move out of the discovered check, which isn't what we saw in the game. But let's see if we're not going to go too much into detail about this. But in the game, what we saw, queen takes d5, and then a backpedal or retreat, rook to c8, and then rook to g6 check, and black has lost his queen, so we are dusting up a few things here, and soon enough checkmate or an additional promotion or something of that nature. I went for checkmate. You have to be careful. I believe this is a fairly advanced thing to do. When we get to around this point, it's good to pursue checkmate as a matter of developing your vision and stuff, but just be aware there's rook to c1 checkmate looming against white, perhaps, unless a move is, the moves will have to be checks or checkmating moves, checking moves or checkmating moves, or white could lose the whole game to rook c1 checkmate. So we played queen to f7 check, being sure to continue with checks, so then queen to f4 check, and of course then queen to g4 checkmate. What a game. I had a blast playing this game. I thought my opponent played well. I thought I played well. So, it's just good stuff. Alright. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.